WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Michiganders have lived with water insecurity for years. Detroit's mass shutoffs in the mid-2010s put the issue in the national spotlight. But the struggle isn't unique to Detroit. Small cities and rural towns have faced rising rates, aging systems, and growing household debt. Many families have been trying to keep up ever since. This year, lawmakers are taking another run at a statewide fix. A new bipartisan set of bills would create a state fund for low-income water assistance. It would cap bills for many struggling households, and it would set firm rules around when water can be shut off. The plan nearly passed last session, but collapsed in the final days. Now it's back with updated language, a broader coalition, and a spot on the Senate floor. I'm joined today by two people who've lived this fight from different angles. State Senator Stephanie Chang has spent years drafting and refining statewide water affordability legislation. Sylvia Ordoño is a longtime organizer with the People's Water Board Coalition. It works on water access and human rights advocacy. Today, they're here to help us understand why this moment matters and what Michigan could gain or lose in the months ahead. Senator Chang, Sylvia, welcome.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. It's glad to be here.
Sylvia, I'd like to start with you. You've spent decades walking into homes where water shutoffs weren't just headlines. They were daily realities. When did you first see that Michigan's water affordability crisis was deeper than anyone wanted to admit?
For me, it's when I was doing early work on this with Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, and we were getting a lot of calls at the office from residents saying, my bill is overdue. I don't know what to do. I don't have any money to put down on what they're asking for. I don't know where I can go for help. And so the calls are coming in more numbers. People are coming in, and people are inviting us to their homes and saying, look, I'm actually afraid to talk about this. It's embarrassing. I'm afraid of what it's going to mean for my family. Can you come over so I can tell you more about this? And walking us through the home, showing us there's no water coming out of any of the fountains, showing us how large the bills are, and telling us about the daily struggles that they're having just being able to live without water.
And so it's not only the deep, deep stress of that, but also the shame of that.
Absolutely. People don't want to talk about when they don't have water service. It's embarrassing, humiliating. People make lots of judgments about you, right? They think you're doing something wrong. Like, why would you not pay your water bill? And it's something that people try to figure out privately. And especially when there's no way to go and get assistance anywhere, a lot of dollars have been cut back, or the process to get in for assistance has been difficult. People figure out, well, maybe I can manage for a while without it. I'll go buy gallons of water, or they'll have cases of water. And you can do that for a little while, right? Especially while you're trying to figure out where you can get some help. But trying to figure out how to cook your meals and brush your teeth and flush your toilet, give your kids a bath, it's not manageable in any way for more than just a couple of days.
Senator Chang, I want to turn to you. You were a community organizer before you arrived in Lansing. What convinced you early on that the state, not just cities, had to take responsibility for a broader solution to the things that Sylvia's talking about?
Yeah, so, my first campaign was back in 2014, and that was the year that there were just massive shutoffs happening, and, the United Nations came in. There was just a lot of really terrible stories happening, and I think that when I first met Nicole Hill, who works now with People's Water Board Coalition, and heard her story of having her water shut off, that really had a big impact on me. She is a mom. She had two small kids at the time, and having to again figure out everything that Sylvia was just talking about, how to figure out how to bathe your kids, how to be able to send them to school clean, and also hearing her story of how she ended up actually in the ER because of a viral infection because she didn't have running water in her home, right? And she is one story out of many, but she has used that voice to really try to help change so many lives, and is very, very powerful. So hearing her story, I think was very impactful for me. And then, when I first took office in 2015, I worked together with a number of groups to actually put together a hearing at the state capitol to hear from people about issues with water. And there were people from all over that came. It was, folks from Flint came and they talked about their water issues. And we had folks from Detroit and Highland Park and also suburban areas as well, all talking about this issue of water. And so, but I think over the past 10 years, we've learned more and more and more because we have in 2015, that's when I said, I'm going to be all in and work on water affordability. But then since then, we've also learned so much and talked to so many people and recognize now, both because we have the numbers from COVID of just how many people were behind on their water bills. It was 317,000 Michigan households. I mean, just an enormous number. Yeah. But also we've talked to so many people and we've heard from so many different groups as well who have seen this as a top priority and top need in their community.
Before we get into exactly what these water affordability bills will do, I want to stay on this idea of the emotional, the practical, the physical toll of rising water costs, because you're both touching on this right now. And I think it's really powerful for us to hear about some of these specific experiences that people have had and the cascading effects that they have in a person's life. So is there another story that comes to mind that either of you want to mention?
Well, I think that there's been a lot of stories told over the years, right? I've been working on water affordability since 1997. So we've seen this play out in lots of miserable ways, unfortunately.
Almost 30 years.
Yes, almost 30 years. But the problem I think that I've found is that there's a lot of residents that have been brave enough to tell their stories publicly and use their name. And it's not been easy for those families. Kids find out, right? They're teased at school, oh, you don't have water. We heard about it on the news, or my mom read about you in the paper. And so for those families that come forward, like Senator Chang was mentioning here about Nicole Hill in particular, it's been a very vulnerable place. But it only tells part of the story. So what we've asked a lot of journalists to do is, do a little deeper dig and find out, well, why are the bills so unaffordable? How is it that so many families are in this situation where they can't afford to pay or keep up, and that the assistance dollars aren't out there that they need to be? So when you start looking at, well, where are the water bills coming from? We look at what's going on with water providers, the debt that they've accumulated in trying to maintain and operate systems, and the additional dollars that are needed. That conversation hasn't been talked about much, so that we understand, well, what is it that residents are being asked to pay, forced to pay, really? Because there's only one place you can get your water service from. It's not like a cell phone where you can change if you don't like one provider. And so we have to start looking at what's going on with local government finances, how they're dealing with their capital improvement plans, where their funding's coming from in grants or loans or bonds, rates, and how is that all factor into what a family or a low-income household in particular is being asked to pay.
So, Sylvia, you're talking about the systemic issues, the deeper factors that we need to interrogate when it comes to why hundreds of thousands of Michiganders are not able to afford their water. So, Senator Chang, that takes it back to you then to talk about what these bills, how they can address some of the systemic cracks in our system.
Yeah. So it's a pretty comprehensive set of solutions, and one that has been crafted with a lot of conversations between water advocates and water providers and, United Way's community action agencies, many folks who were involved in this process over a long period of time. And basically what they would do is ensure that we actually have a statewide water affordability program to make sure that folks get if they are low income, so below 200% of the federal poverty level, they would get they could apply to be part of the program. They would get a a water bill that is not more than either 3% or 2%, depending on where their income lies, of approximate household income for that area. And then they would also be able to get help with past due bills as well as plumbing repairs. And actually both those things super important, right? There's a lot of folks who just have past due water bills that are, adding up. Yeah. And then those plumbing repairs are not only good for the individual homeowners and residents, but also for the water providers, right? Because right now people are paying for water that is not coming out of their tap because we've got lots of leaky faucets and old pipes and leaky toilets and all of these things. And so if we can actually do those plumbing repairs, it'll help make sure that the money that people are paying is actually coming into their home. And then one of the things that we recognize, though, is that through all of this work, we have really seen that different communities have different needs and different desires. And so we have built in a lot of flexibility. So if one city over here wants to be part of the state program, they can do that. Or if they want to create their own program, they can do that. If they want to opt out of helping to pay for the program through collecting $1.25 per month for water bills, they can opt out. As long as they are not shutting off water and not adding those past due bills to the tax liens. And that is really important. So we've created basically a lot of different options for local governments to choose, what's the best option for you, based on lots of feedback that we've heard. Another part that's really important to mention is that we have built-in shut-off protections. So for those who have chronic illnesses or other types of health conditions where they have a communicable disease or something like that, where they really truly do need that access to water, they would be protected from shut-off. And then everyone else would also get a different kind of protection in that they would get a certain number of 3 notices, whether it's a door knock or a phone call or piece of mail, etc., all with the goal of getting someone not shut off, but actually into an affordability program. So there's a few other pieces, but those are sort of the highlights. And we think that all the funding, the actual affordability programs at the state or local level, and those shut-off protections really work hand in hand to make sure that we're protecting folks and then also really, helping the system overall.
So what I'm hearing is that this set of water affordability bills is very much hinging on the fact that water is a justice issue as much as a financial one. Sylvia, I want to turn back to you. Which parts of this proposal feel most essential for protecting people who've borne the worst of the crisis?
Well, we've made it very clear that if we're going to be doing anything legislatively at the state level, we've got to make sure that we're thinking about this in a long-term way. Many local programs have been set up to help residents, but on a short-term and temporary basis when funding is available. And so in order to be able to provide this for any given community, especially for the whole state, right? Many communities, it had to be a way that was going to be sustainable for as long as people needed it. Poverty doesn't end in any kind of short period, and so it doesn't help to have assistance for only short periods. And so we also wanted it to be sure that it was recognizing both the need of the households and the need of the local water providers. So while the households will be getting a discounted amount on a bill that they can afford to pay, the providers are still made whole because they're going to get that gap payment out of the state fund. And so it benefits both the municipality and the household or the water customer. And so we've been trying to do better about telling the big picture story rather than just focusing on that vulnerable household, because this really is at least a two-pronged problem, right, for local government and for those households that are within the water system. So it's been important for us to make sure that built-in provisions are there for households, as were noted by the senator in some of the details. Among those are even protections for tenants. There's been a lot of changes in the ways that landlords have been charging for bills that used to be included in the rent. You used to have your natural gas and your electricity, garbage and water included. A lot of landlords, because the water bills have gone up, have tried to get themselves out of that equation and now have tenants responsible for the water bill. But for tenants that have been in any kind of place long enough, the water bill is still in the lease as something that's included, although landlords have been trying to finagle their way out of it and have the tenant pay for the water bill, even if it's not their responsibility.
Yeah.
So the legislation also builds in protections to help residents who might be vulnerable and have shutoffs or be required to pay a bill that's not their responsibility.
I want to ask about the pushback. I mean, last session's water affordability bills collapsed late in the game. And Senator Chang, one thing I'm wondering about is, increased water usage that stresses the system. It increases the cost. Were there concerns about that or guidance regarding household water usage? Will there be if this bill passes?
I think some of the main concerns that we heard from folks were, that they wanted, a couple of different things. One concern that we have definitely resolved is that, we heard from some folks, in some parts of the state, we want to keep the money local. We don't want the money that we put in for that $1.25 per month, which I actually don't think I mentioned earlier, that was modeled after what we already do for energy, right? Everyone's already paying a little bit more to help low-income customers on our energy bills. So that funding factor, folks were like, well, we don't want that money going to that other side of the state. Well, we've now broken the state into a couple different regions. And so the money will be kept locally so that the money that you put into the program helps people in your own region. So that's super important. The other thing that we heard was just pushback on, from some local governments saying, well, why should we be part of the state program? So then now we've built in some additional ways that people can participate. So they can either do the state program, and honestly, for many providers that are small and don't have a ton of capacity, it's probably what they will end up doing. But if you want to create your own program and not put in the $1.25 into your region and just figure out some other way locally that you're going to fund the program, well, you can do that now under this bill. Or if you want to just completely opt out of the $1.25 and just make sure that you're not shutting off water. And that's actually also modeled after what we have done for energy when we first created the MEET program, 13 years ago, I think 12 or 13 years ago. Then that is also now an option. So many of the concerns that were raised, we listened, and we have actually found ways to address through the legislation. I should note that this is bipartisan. Really grateful for the bipartisan work we've done with Senator John DeMoose, conversations that we have with other Republican lawmakers, both in the UP, in Downriver, in other parts of the state, because people are seeing that this is a huge problem in their areas as well.
So we've acknowledged, though, in this state that we should be helping out our neighbors who can't afford energy.
Yes,
why hasn't this been acknowledged when it comes to water, which is so elemental to life?
Well, I appreciate you raising that because it's a huge point that we have been trying to make for quite some time now is we absolutely want folks to have that help with their energy bills, and water is essential to human life, right? And so we should be paying the same amount of attention to making sure that people can afford their water bills as we do to their energy bills. And especially, we're in the Great Lakes state. We're surrounded by fresh water. But let's make sure that every single Michigander actually has access to that water in their home. That's super important. I think, I don't know how to know exactly, kind of going back in time to when the MEEP program was started, like what were the forces that allowed that to happen versus what is happening now. I mean, I think that one of the things that I'm just grateful for is that people are seeing the parallel now. And I think that because water rates have been going up so much, pretty much everywhere, and Sylvia could talk about the work that they've been doing in various cities across the state, there's more and more recognition that actually, energy bills and water bills, let's make sure we're talking about both.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. After the break, I'll continue my conversation with Sylvia Orduño and State Senator Stephanie Chang about the rising cost of water in our state and some new bills in the State House to address the problem. That's next. Stay with us. It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guests are Sylvia Orduño of the People's Water Board Coalition and Michigan State Senator Stephanie Chang. We're talking about the rising cost of water in our state and some new bills in the State House to address the problem. Sylvia, in your many, many years of organizing, you've moved from protest to negotiation with institutions that once carried out mass shutoffs. I'm wondering, what did that shift require of you? And what did being in those different rooms teach you?
Gosh, I appreciate the question. It's really been a hard lesson. And you're right, we were fighting very much the organizations, the local governments that we needed help from. And we couldn't get eye to eye on it for a long time. And part of it had to be with the whole narrative of it, right? We were trying to have residents tell their own stories about how difficult it was, while at the same time we're hearing blaming and shaming instead, saying, just pay your bills, right? We know you're spending your money on something else, just pay your bills. And it's taken a lot of time and energy and participation, really, from many other stakeholders to finally get us to a place to say, look, we understand that we're all struggling in our different ways of how it is that costs have to be paid, right? Whether it's from the household level of use to the system level of how it is that they manage a whole operation and where those funds come from, and then all the regulatory things around it, right, that they're responsible for. But in the end, we kept saying it matters to households, vulnerable households, about how it is that they can manage what's coming out of their tap and what's being flushed out of the house, right? And that's in addition to even the drainage charges, the stormwater charges that a lot of households have no control over. They can reduce the bills that they have by shutting off that faucet when you're brushing your teeth, or as some families have told us, making food that has less water in it, right? So you're not relying on that, which means that you're likely not using the best ingredients, right, or having the best food options at the table. So in breaking down all of those stories, we also had to be willing to listen to what the local governments were telling us about their challenges. And when we got to that point, we realized we're going to have to find a way to kind of build some trust, right? Because we very much did not trust the other, right? It felt like it was just more blaming, shaming, but also ways of penalizing families. So when we realized, look, we really have more in common in terms of the needs than we believe. Let's see what we can do to work from there. But I have to say, this is also where it really mattered, where Senator Chang and other members of the House and Legislature, Senate came through to say, look, let's work together. We can work on the different bills. We can change the language. We can find ways to build compromise. And we did do that. And it was a difficult process. It's taken many years. But it's still fragile at the same time, because we know that there are pressures on local governments even now. If we look at the City of Detroit's Lifeline program, they've had to scale it way back because the resources aren't there from the federal government anymore the way that they used to. And we know that there's still pressure about the arrearage that builds up while we're trying to figure out how to get the state program going. And water departments have to still figure out ways to pay back those banks or their bondholders for all of the debt that they acquire to operate these systems. And while we recognize that there are some people that are concerned about those safety net issues, there are others that don't care about that. They're like, all I care about is my own bill. I don't need assistance. I don't need affordability. I just need other people to be responsible for their debt. But we all end up paying if any part of the customer base cannot afford to pay and is not paying. So that changes the bill for someone else when rates go up or fees and other kinds of costs change for them. So we're trying to show that this is really a bigger picture issue than just the household.
We only have a few minutes left here, and I want to acknowledge something, and that is that Detroit and other majority Black communities have lived the sharpest impacts. How have race and poverty shaped who gets shut off first and who gets heard last? Senator Chang.
I mean, I think that certainly Detroit being a majority Black city and has gotten a lot of attention, right? For also we're the biggest city in Michigan, right? So we've seen those dynamics play out for sure. But I want to also really be totally clear that when we have looked at this issue at the statewide level, this issue of rising water bills has literally affected every single community. Maybe the shutoffs didn't happen in the same way that they did en masse, like in Detroit in 2014, but like tiny little villages and rural areas in the UP and northern Michigan, and, like just everywhere, every corner of the state really truly is impacted by this issue. And so that's why we've got to make sure we pass a statewide solution.
Sylvia, in the last minute that we have here, if lawmakers don't act again this year, what will another 12 months of waiting mean for the families that are closest to crisis, many families from across the state that Senator Chang just described?
Things are going to get worse. We've seen what it looks like when it gets worse, and we basically don't want to go back to that again as we did before federal funding came through during the pandemic and such. We know that local governments also need the support. They're basically holding their breath, too, to see if they're going to be able to get some kind of fund set up at the state level. And if it doesn't happen, then we know there are going to be consequences for households. The arrearage can build up only so high. The debt at the local government water provider level can only go so much. And so there's going to be push and pull again. We're hoping that we can come to some kind of way to address this at the state level. And I can tell you that when we talk to residents and local governments, I've been spending a lot of time going to local government, city council, city commission meetings, county commissioner meetings, and talking with them as well. We're hearing the problems, right? And so this is not just a Highland Park or Detroit problem as it originated. It really is a statewide problem, and people are looking for solutions.
Sylvia Orduño, organizer and leader with the People's Water Board Coalition, and State Senator Stephanie Chang. Thank you both so much for joining me on the Metro.
Oh, thank you very much.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. Stay with us.